The blizzard came with a vengeance, thrashing the Wyoming territory with ice and fury. Wind howled through Ashwood Valley like a wounded beast, tearing at anything foolish enough to stand in its path. Snow swirled in thick, disorienting clouds, erasing the line between earth and sky. In this white void, a lone figure struggled forward, each step a battle against nature's rage. Abigail Fairchild clutched her infant son tighter against her chest, her thin coat offering little protection from the biting cold. Her breath came in ragged clouds, her legs trembling with exhaustion. The baby, Gabriel, had fallen mercifully silent, his tiny face buried in the folds of a worn blanket. The sound of hoofbeats pierced through the howl of the wind. Someone was following them. Panic surged through her veins, lending her strength she didn't know she still possessed. She pushed forward, her boots sinking deep into the fresh snow. The hoofbeats grew louder, closer. Abigail stumbled on a hidden rock, pitching forward. She twisted her body at the last moment, taking the fall on her shoulder to protect Gabriel. The impact knocked the wind from her lungs. Gabriel awoke with a startled cry that cut through the storm like a knife. "Shh, sweet one," she whispered, her lips blue with cold. "Please, God, protect my son." The rider was close now, a dark shadow in the swirling white. Abigail struggled to her feet, legs numb and unresponsive. Her mind flashed back to the train station just an hour before. Elliot Crawford's handsome face, his reassuring smile as he said, "Wait here, I'll be right back." The gradual realization as minutes turned to hours that he wasn't returning. The station clerk's impatient voice asking for her name for the record. "I don't have one anymore," she had whispered. The clerk had stared at her with a mixture of confusion and pity before turning away, leaving her alone on the empty platform as night fell and the blizzard began. Then the stranger had appeared from the shadows, Wyatt Davis, introducing himself as Elliot's brother, his eyes cold and calculating as they settled on the bundle in her arms. "You're carrying my family's property, girl," he had called after her as she fled into the storm. Now the rider was upon her. Abigail turned, pressing Gabriel protectively against her chest, ready to fight despite her exhaustion. But it wasn't Wyatt who emerged from the curtain of snow. The figure that materialized was broader, taller, mounted on a massive chestnut horse that snorted clouds of steam into the frigid air. The rider reined to a stop, regarding her silently from beneath the brim of a snow-dusted hat. "Please," Abigail managed, her voice barely audible above the storm. "Please don't take my son." The rider dismounted in one fluid motion, revealing a man of about 40, his face weathered by sun and wind. A long scar ran from his left temple down to his jaw, silvery white against his tanned skin. When he spoke, his voice was low and rough, as though rarely used. "You'll both die out here." He took a step closer, and Abigail retreated, stumbling in the deep snow. "I'm a doctor," the man added, the words short and practical. "Your child will freeze to death if we don't move quickly." As if to emphasize his point, Gabriel let out another cry, weaker this time. Something in the sound seemed to decide things for the stranger. Without waiting for her consent, he moved forward, scooping Abigail into his arms with surprising gentleness. She struggled weakly, but the fight had left her body, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. "My son," she whispered, "is safely between us," the man replied, settling her onto his horse before mounting behind her. As they rode through the blinding storm, Abigail felt consciousness slipping away. The last thing she remembered was the stranger's voice, unexpectedly tender, near her ear. "Hold on, girl, I've lost too many people in my life. Can't lose any more." Then darkness claimed her. Griffin Hayes's cabin stood sturdy against the storm, a defiant island in a sea of swirling white. Built of solid pine logs and nestled among towering evergreens, it had weathered worse than this in its time. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, disappearing into the night. Griffin approached on horseback, the unconscious woman cradled against his chest, her child clutched securely between them. He whistled sharply as they neared, and the cabin door swung open, spilling warm light into the darkness. Hannah Porter stood framed in the doorway, her dark face lined with age and wisdom, a shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. Her gray-streaked hair was tied back in a neat bun, and her expression shifted from concern to resigned understanding as she took in the scene. He's brought someone home again, she murmured to herself, shaking her head. But her keen eyes betrayed genuine worry as she hurried out to help. Get them inside, quick now, she called, her voice carrying authority despite her age. That baby sounds half frozen. Griffin dismounted carefully, handing the infant to Hannah before gathering the unconscious Abigail in his arms. The old woman cradled the child expertly, hushing his weak cries as she led the way into the cabin's warmth. The spare room is ready, Hannah said, already moving toward the fire to warm the baby. Same as always. Griffin carried Abigail through to a small bedroom off the main living area. He laid her gently on the bed, then paused, his expression unreadable as he studied her face. Snow melted from her eyelashes, running down her cheeks like tears. He reached out, hesitated, then carefully removed her sodden coat and boots before covering her with several thick blankets. When he returned to the main room, Hannah had unwrapped the baby and was examining him by the firelight, her movements efficient and practiced. How is he? Griffin asked, his voice low. Cold, hungry, but strong. Hannah glanced up. Who are they this time? Griffin shrugged, moving to stoke the fire. Found them in the storm. She was running from something, or someone. Hannah nodded slowly, her eyes studying Griffin's face. I recognize that hunted look, she said quietly. She's running, just like I was once. Hannah had been a slave in Virginia before the war, escaping north with nothing but the clothes on her back and a desperate hope for freedom. Griffin had found her half dead in the woods behind his field hospital, nursed her back to health, and later brought her west with him after the war. She was the only person he truly trusted, the only one who had seen the depths of his pain. The baby needs milk, Hannah said. That new nanny goat should do. Griffin nodded, already pulling his coat back on. I'll see to it. As he stepped back into the storm, Hannah looked down at the infant in her arms. Your mama found the right man to stumble upon, little one, she whispered. For all his gruffness, he's got a healer's heart. She settled into a rocking chair by the fire, humming softly to the child. Her mind drifted back to the darkest days after the war, when Griffin had returned a different man than the one who had left. Gone was the brilliant young surgeon with laughing eyes and ready smile. In his place stood a hollow-eyed stranger who seldom spoke, haunted by the ghosts of those he couldn't save. He was the finest doctor in Virginia before the war took everything from him. Hannah murmured to the baby. Maybe you and your mama are exactly what he needs. Later, after Griffin had returned with goat's milk and the baby was fed and sleeping peacefully in a makeshift cradle, Hannah found Griffin standing by the woman's bedside, checking her pulse with practiced fingers. How is she? Hannah asked from the doorway. Exhaustion, early stages of exposure. She'll recover. His clinical assessment couldn't quite mask the concern in his eyes. You were a doctor again today, Hannah observed quietly. It's been a long while since I've seen that. Griffin turned away. I stopped being a doctor the day I couldn't save them. Hannah didn't press the point. She knew better than most the weight of grief he carried for his wife Sophia and their son James, lost to typhoid while he was away saving strangers on the battlefield. It was a wound that had never healed, festering beneath his silence. There's coffee on the stove, she said instead, and some stew, if you're hungry. Griffin nodded, his attention still on the sleeping woman. I'll sit with her a while, make sure the fever doesn't take hold. Hannah left him there, a silent sentinel in the flickering lamplight. 2 days passed before Abigail opened her eyes. The blizzard had blown itself out, leaving behind a crystalline world of pristine white. Sunlight streamed through a small window, casting patterns across a rough-hewn wooden floor. For a moment, disorientation gripped her. This wasn't the train station, nor was it the elegant Boston home she'd grown up in, or Elliot's promised Wyoming homestead. Panic surged as memory returned in fragments. The storm, the pursuit, the stranger on horseback. Gabriel! She bolted upright, heart hammering. Her eyes fell on a small wooden cradle beside the bed, and relief flooded through her as she saw her son sleeping peacefully, his tiny chest rising and falling steadily. She reached for him with trembling hands, needing to feel his warmth, to assure herself he was real. The door creaked open, and Abigail instinctively clutched Gabriel closer. An elderly black woman entered, carrying a steaming mug. Her face was lined with age, but her eyes were sharp and kind. Easy now, child, the woman said. her voice gentle but firm. You're safe here. No one can find you, whoever they may be. Abigail swallowed, her throat painfully dry. Where am I? Who are you? My name is Hannah Porter. The woman offered the mug, which contained some sort of herbal tea. You're at Griffin Hayes' ranch, about 15 miles outside Ashwood. He found you and your little one in the storm 2 nights ago, brought you here, and tended to you both. Abigail accepted the tea with shaking hands, the warmth seeping into her cold fingers. Griffin Hayes, the man with the scar? Hannah nodded. That's him. Not much for talking, but he cares in his own way. She settled into a chair beside the bed. He was the finest doctor in Virginia before the war took everything from him. A doctor? Abigail glanced down at Gabriel. He saved us. That he did, though he'd be loath to admit it. Hannah's expression softened. He doesn't think of himself as a healer anymore, not since he lost his wife and son. Abigail took a sip of the tea, its warmth spreading through her chest. What happened to them? Typhoid back in '63. He was away at the front lines saving soldiers while they slipped away at home. Hannah's voice held old sorrow. He's blamed himself ever since. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound Gabriel's soft breathing. Abigail felt a pang of empathy for the gruff stranger who had saved their lives. The door opened again, and Griffin himself entered, wiping his hands on a cloth after tending to his horses. His presence seemed to fill the small room, though he moved with a quieted economy of motion. His eyes met Abigail's briefly before shifting to Gabriel. I'm Abigail, she said, her voice hoarse from disuse. I know, Griffin replied simply. He nodded toward the baby. He needs milk. There's a nanny goat that just kidded in the barn. With that, he turned and left, his part of the conversation apparently concluded. Hannah chuckled softly. Don't mind him. That's practically a speech by his standards. Abigail stared after him, puzzled by the man who had risked his life to save them, yet could barely look her in the eye. Does he want us to leave? If he did, he wouldn't have mentioned the goat. Hannah stood. Rest now. When you're stronger, we'll get you properly settled. Days stretched into weeks as winter maintained its grip on the valley. Abigail gradually regained her strength, coming to understand that Griffin's silence wasn't hostility, but simply his nature. He spoke when necessary, always direct and practical, never asking about her past or why she had been alone in the blizzard. The cabin was spacious but simple, a large main room with a stone fireplace, Griffin's bedroom, the small room Abigail and Gabriel occupied, and Hannah's quarters off the kitchen. A covered porch wrapped around 2 sides, and nearby stood a barn for the horses Griffin raised and trained, the source of his modest livelihood. One evening in late January, Hannah found Abigail sitting by the fire, Gabriel sleeping contentedly in her arms. The old woman was working on a small quilt, her fingers deftly weaving together scraps of fabric. I was thinking, Hannah said without looking up from her work. This little one needs his name on his blanket. Family tradition where I come from. Abigail tensed, her arms tightening slightly around Gabriel. Gabriel, she said softly. His name is Gabriel. Hannah nodded. A fine name. And yours to go alongside it? Fairchild, wasn't it? Abigail's eyes filled unexpectedly with tears. I don't have a family name anymore, she whispered, gaze fixed on the flames. My father took it away when I became pregnant. Hannah's hand stilled. I see. Abigail reached into her dress pocket and withdrew a crumpled piece of paper, a page torn from a Bible, its edges worn soft with handling. My mother slipped this into my belongings the night I left, she explained, her voice barely audible. It was from our family Bible. Hannah leaned closer to see the faded handwriting in the margin. My dearest daughter, when all doors close, God will open a window. She couldn't stand against my father openly, Abigail continued. He was the Reverend. His word was law. But she found her own way to tell me she hadn't abandoned me. Griffin entered silently from outside, pausing in the doorway when he realized the women were in conversation. He moved to the fire to warm his hands, his back to them, but Abigail sensed he was listening. I've been thinking, she said, gathering her courage. If I'm to start anew, I should choose a new name. She looked down at Gabriel, then out the window at the snow-blanketed landscape. Winters, she decided. Abigail Winters. Hannah smiled, her needle resuming its steady rhythm. A beautiful name for a new beginning. Griffin, still facing the fire, gave a slight nod, his only acknowledgement, but somehow it was enough. Abigail felt something settle inside her, a sense of rightness. For the first time since leaving her father's house, she felt the stirrings of hope. That night, as she tucked Gabriel into his cradle, Abigail whispered his new full name, Gabriel Winters. The baby cooed in response, his tiny fingers catching one of hers. In that moment, despite everything she had lost, Abigail felt inexplicably rich. The following morning, she found a steaming cup of tea waiting at her place at the table, as had become the daily routine. Griffin was already gone to the barn, and Hannah was kneading bread dough. The simple domesticity of it all brought a lump to Abigail's throat. Later, when Griffin returned for the midday meal, he addressed her directly for the first time in days. The path to the goat pen needs clearing. I'll show you how to milk her yourself, if you'd like. It wasn't much, just a practical suggestion, but Abigail recognized it as an offering of sorts, a way for her to contribute, to belong, even if temporarily. I'd like that, she replied, and was rewarded with another of his almost imperceptible nods. As January gave way to February, the daily rhythms of ranch life became familiar to Abigail. She learned to milk the goat, to chop vegetables for Hannah's stews, to hang laundry in the frigid air where it froze stiff before being brought inside to thaw by the fire. Griffin spent his days with the horses, his touch gentle and patient with the animals, in a way that revealed depths beneath his reserved exterior. The contrast between his communion with the creatures and his sparse words with people fascinated Abigail, like reading glimpses of a language she was slowly learning to decipher. Abigail often caught him watching Gabriel with an expression she couldn't quite define. Not quite sadness, not quite longing, but something in between. She noticed how he checked the baby's breathing whenever he thought she wasn't looking, his fingers moving with the precision of the doctor he once was. One night when Gabriel developed a slight cough, Abigail found herself searching Griffin's cabinet for something to ease his symptoms. Most of the shelves held practical items, tools, leather working supplies, a few books, but on the bottom shelf she discovered a locked wooden box. Carved into its lid were two names, Sophia and James. His wife and son. Hannah's voice came from behind her, making Abigail start guiltily. The typhoid took them in '63. He couldn't save them despite having saved hundreds of others in the war. Abigail carefully replaced the box. Is that why he stopped practicing medicine? Hannah nodded, her eyes sad. He said if his knowledge couldn't save those he loved most, it wasn't worth anything. She paused, glancing toward the door to ensure Griffin wasn't nearby. But I see the way he looks at your boy. That's the look of a man who still has healing in him, whether he believes it or not. The following day, Abigail observed Griffin treating a horse with a leg wound, his movements precise and assured, his focus absolute. When he finished and sensed her watching, he straightened, something defensive in his posture. You're still a doctor, she said quietly. Griffin stiffened, then continued packing away his supplies without looking at her. I'm just a horse trainer now. But you saved us, Abigail persisted gently. Griffin paused, his back still to her. Sometimes, he said after a long silence, we do what needs doing, not what we are. It wasn't much, but it was the longest exchange they had had. As Abigail watched him walk away, she realized she was beginning to see beyond his silence to the wounded healer beneath. That evening, Gabriel smiled for the first time, a real responsive smile, not just a reflex. Abigail called Hannah to witness it, and even Griffin, hearing the commotion, appeared in the doorway. For just a moment, as Gabriel smiled again, Abigail thought she saw the corner of Griffin's mouth twitch upward before he turned away. It was a small thing, that almost smile. Yet somehow it felt like the first crocus pushing through snow. A promise that spring, however distant, was on its way. March arrived with alternating thaws and freezes, the land caught between winter's grip and spring's gentle coaxing. The deep snowdrifts began to recede, revealing patches of brown earth beneath. On clearer days, Griffin ventured into Ashwood for supplies, always returning before nightfall with necessities and occasional small luxuries. A bag of hard candies for Hannah, a length of ribbon Abigail could use to tie back her hair. When Gabriel turned 4 months old by Abigail's reckoning, Griffin announced over breakfast that they would all go into town the following day. Time the boy was properly checked by a doctor, he said gruffly. When Abigail opened her mouth to remind him that he was a doctor, he silenced her with a look. A practicing doctor, he amended. Hannah gave Abigail a meaningful glance. This would be her first venture into Ashwood, her first exposure to the curious eyes of strangers who would undoubtedly wonder about her presence at Griffin's ranch. The next morning dawned clear and relatively mild. Griffin brought the wagon around, and Hannah helped Abigail prepare Gabriel for the journey, wrapping him warmly despite the spring-like temperature. "Now, Abigail," Hannah said quietly as they loaded the wagon, "folks in town will talk. They always do. Best to keep your answers simple and let Griffin handle the nosy ones." Abigail nodded, anxiety fluttering in her stomach. She hadn't been around strangers since arriving at the ranch, and the memory of Wyatt Davis's cold eyes still haunted her dreams. The journey to Ashwood took nearly 2 hours over rutted, muddy roads. Gabriel, lulled by the wagon's motion, slept contentedly in Abigail's arms. Griffin drove in his usual silence, though occasionally he would point out a landmark or name a distant mountain peak, small offerings of inclusion that Abigail treasured. Ashwood proved to be larger than Abigail had imagined. A proper town with a main street lined by wooden boardwalks, a church steeple visible above the rooftops, and the constant coming and going of horses and wagons. Griffin directed their wagon toward a large general store near the center of town. "Ezra Franklin's place," he explained. "Good man. Friend of mine from way back." The proprietor, a white-haired man with kind eyes and a ready smile, greeted Griffin warmly as they entered. "Hayes, didn't expect to see you until the spring drive." His gaze fell on Abigail and Gabriel, curiosity evident but not unkind. "And who might these folks be?" Griffin shifted uncomfortably. "Abigail Winters and her son Gabriel, staying at the ranch for a while." Ezra's eyebrows rose, but his smile remained genuine. "Well now, I never thought I'd see the day Griffin Hayes brought a family to my store." He extended a hand to Abigail. "Welcome to Ashwood, Mrs. Winters." "Thank you," Abigail replied, relieved at the man's easy acceptance. While Griffin discussed an order of supplies with Ezra, Abigail browsed the store's offerings, marveling at the variety after months of the ranch's simplicity. Gabriel, awake now and curious, watched the colorful displays with wide eyes. A woman's voice broke into Abigail's thoughts. "Well, aren't you just the sweetest little man?" Abigail turned to see a plump, elegantly dressed woman of about 50, her gray-streaked hair arranged in an elaborate style beneath a feathered hat. The woman was smiling at Gabriel, but her eyes were sharp with assessment as they took in Abigail's modest appearance. "I'm Martha Simmons," the woman introduced herself. "My husband owns the bank here in Ashwood, and you must be Mrs. Hayes. I had no idea Griffin had remarried. How delightful to meet you at last." Before Abigail could correct the misunderstanding, she felt a presence at her back. Griffin had appeared silently beside her, his hand coming to rest lightly on her shoulder. "Mrs. Winters is staying with us for a time," he said, his voice carrying a note of finality. "That's all that needs knowing, Martha." Martha's smile remained fixed, but her eyes narrowed slightly. Of course. We're just pleased to see you in town, Griffin. It's been too long." After they left the store sometime later, purchases loaded in the wagon, Abigail noticed a man watching them intently from the doorway of the saloon across the street. Something in his stance made her blood run cold. "Griffin," she whispered, "that man is staring at us." Griffin glanced casually in the direction she indicated, then helped her into the wagon with a touch more urgency than before. "Keep your head down," he murmured. "We'll talk when we're clear of town." They rode in tense silence until Ashwood disappeared behind them. Finally, Griffin spoke. "Someone's looking for you." It wasn't a question. Abigail nodded, clutching Gabriel closer. "Elliot's brother, Wyatt Davis. He wants to take Gabriel." She hesitated, then added, "He said Gabriel is family property." Griffin's jaw tightened, but he didn't seem surprised. "Figured it might be something like that. My ranch isn't easy to find. We'll be careful." A week after their trip to Ashwood, Ezra Franklin visited the ranch with troubling news. "Someone's been asking about the woman and child, Hayes," Ezra said privately while Abigail was in the kitchen with Hannah. "Well-dressed fellow, city manners. Said his name was Davis." Griffin frowned. "What did he say?" "Claims he's looking for his sister-in-law and nephew, offering money for information." Ezra paused. "I didn't say anything, but Martha Simmons seemed mighty eager to talk with him after I left." Griffin glanced toward the kitchen, where Abigail's laughter floated through the open door. Thank you for the warning, Ezra. I'll keep watch. After Ezra departed, Griffin spent the afternoon checking the perimeter fences and preparing his firearms. Abigail noticed the change in his demeanor but didn't question it. She had learned that with Griffin, answers came with time, not questions. The simple "we" sent a wave of relief through Abigail. Griffin wasn't sending them away. They weren't facing this alone. As the wagon crested a hill, Abigail looked back at the distant town, then at Griffin's profile, solid and reassuring against the spring sky. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, she and Gabriel had found not just shelter, but sanctuary. The road before them wound through greening meadows, promising a journey not yet complete but headed in the right direction. Gabriel cooed softly in her arms, reaching toward a hawk soaring overhead, fearless and curious as only the very young can be. Watching him, Abigail felt a flicker of that same fearlessness kindle in her own heart. April arrived with gentle rains that transformed the valley. What had been a monochrome landscape of whites and grays now burst with vibrant greens and the first shy wildflowers. The world seemed to exhale after winter's long breath, and with the changing season came subtle shifts within the walls of Griffin Hayes' ranch house. Abigail found herself drawn to the awakening land. Each morning after breakfast, she would bundle Gabriel into a sling across her chest and walk the perimeter of the ranch yard, pointing out new growth to her wide-eyed son. Look, Gabriel, she would whisper, bending toward a tiny purple crocus pushing through the soil. Life finds a way, even after the hardest winter. Hannah often watched these excursions from the kitchen window, her weathered face softening with a smile. That girl's bringing spring inside these walls, too, she observed to Griffin one morning as he laced his boots by the fire. Griffin merely grunted in response, but his eyes followed Abigail's slender figure as she knelt to examine a robin's nest with Gabriel. The changes in Griffin himself were so gradual, they might have gone unnoticed by anyone who hadn't known him before. Hannah, however, saw them clearly, the way his shoulders carried less tension, how he occasionally lingered at the table after meals instead of immediately retreating to the barn, the almost imperceptible softening around his eyes when Gabriel grasped his finger with tiny, determined hands. One afternoon, Hannah found Griffin repairing a broken rocking chair that had long languished in the storage shed. Haven't seen that old thing in years, she remarked, leaning against the workbench. Griffin ran a hand over the smooth wood of the armrest. Thought Mrs. Winters might find it useful. For the baby. Hannah nodded, hiding her smile. Sophia always loved that chair, she said carefully, watching his reaction. Griffin's hands stilled for a moment, then resumed their work. Yes, he said simply. She did. It was the first time in years he had acknowledged his late wife without visible pain. Hannah took it as the victory it was. Later that evening, Griffin carried the restored rocking chair into the main room, placing it near the fire without ceremony. For the boy, he said when Abigail looked up in surprise. Easier to rock him to sleep. Thank you, Abigail replied, her voice warm with genuine gratitude. It's beautiful. Something flickered in Griffin's eyes. Pleasure, perhaps, or memory, before he nodded and turned away. But he paused in the doorway, glancing back as Abigail settled into the chair with Gabriel. For just a moment, his stoic expression softened, and Abigail caught a glimpse of the man he might have been before loss hardened him. That night, after Gabriel was asleep in his cradle, Abigail sat alone by the dying fire, running her hand over the smooth wood of the rocking chair's arm. The care Griffin had taken in its restoration touched her deeply. It wasn't a grand gesture, but in its quiet thoughtfulness, it spoke volumes. In Boston society, declarations and promises flowed freely, but Griffin's world operated on different currency. Action. The steaming tea awaiting her each dawn spoke volumes no flowery speech could match. When he fashioned a small wooden toy for Gabriel during evening storms, or reinforced the barn door before winds that hadn't yet arrived, Abigail recognized these weren't merely chores but a language all his own, one of protection, foresight, and growing affection. The peace of their routine was shattered one stormy night in mid-April. Rain lashed the windows of the ranch house, and wind moaned through the rafters like restless spirits. Abigail had just settled Gabriel for the night when she noticed his skin felt unusually warm to her touch. Within an hour, his temperature had climbed alarmingly, his breathing becoming labored. his normally rosy skin taking on a frightening pallor. "Hannah!" Abigail called, panic rising in her throat as Gabriel's whimpers turned to weak, gasping cries. "Something's wrong with Gabriel." Hannah hurried in, her experienced hands quickly checking the baby's forehead and chest. "He's burning up," she confirmed, her expression grave. "Griffin," she called toward the main room, "we need you." Griffin appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene with a glance. For the first time since Abigail had known him, she saw real fear flash across his face. The same fear she realized that must have gripped him when his own son fell ill. "I can't," he whispered, taking a step back. "The last time I tried to save a child." Hannah gripped his shoulder firmly. "But you're the only one who can, Dr. Sois. There's no one else for 20 miles. Griffin stood frozen, his eyes fixed on Gabriel's tiny form, his face a battlefield of warring emotions. Abigail could almost see the ghosts of his past crowding around him, paralyzing him with remembered grief. She rose from the bedside and approached him slowly, tears streaming unchecked down her face. "I trust you," she whispered, kneeling before him. "Only you." Griffin's eyes met hers and something shifted in their gray depths, fear giving way to resolve. "Bring my medical bag," he ordered Hannah, his voice taking on a decisive quality Abigail had never heard before. "And boil water." What followed was a night of desperate struggle against the illness threatening Gabriel's life. Griffin diagnosed pneumonia, his hands moving with practiced precision as he prepared a mustard plaster for the baby's chest in a willow bark tea to reduce the fever. Throughout the night, he worked tirelessly, his focus absolute, his earlier hesitation vanished. Abigail remained at Gabriel's side, applying cool cloths to his forehead when the fever raged, holding him upright when coughing fits racked his tiny body. Griffin never left the room, his presence steady and reassuring despite the gravity of the situation. As dawn approached, Gabriel's fever finally broke. Color gradually returned to his cheeks and his breathing eased. Exhausted, Abigail watched as Griffin performed one final examination, his fingers gentle but thorough as they checked Gabriel's pulse and listened to his chest. "He'll recover," Griffin announced, and the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "Keep him warm. Continue the willow bark tea every 4 hours." "Thank you," Abigail whispered as Gabriel slept peacefully for the first time in hours. Griffin looked at her directly, his eyes revealing more emotion than she had ever seen in them before. "No," he said quietly. "Thank you for trusting me when I couldn't trust myself." It was the longest sentence he had spoken to her, and in its wake hung a moment of connection more profound than any they had shared before. Abigail felt something shift between them. A barrier lowered, a distance shortened. Griffin cleared his throat and began packing away his medical supplies, the moment passing but not forgotten. As he worked, Abigail noticed his hands, strong and capable, yet surprisingly gentle, hands that had saved countless lives during the war, hands that had just saved her son. "You saved him," she said simply. Griffin paused, then continued his methodical packing. "We both did," he replied. And in those 3 words, Abigail heard an acknowledgement of partnership that warmed her more than any fire could. Hannah appeared in the doorway with fresh tea and bread. Her knowing eyes took in the scene, and a small smile touched her lips. "The rain stopped," she announced, "and look who's feeling better," she added as Gabriel opened his eyes and gave a tiny, weak cough. Griffin nodded, satisfied, and rose to leave. At the doorway, he hesitated. "Call me if his fever returns," he said, then added more softly, "I'll be close by." After he left, Hannah settled in the chair beside Abigail. "Well," she said with quiet significance, "looks like our Dr. Hayes has found his way back, at least a little." Abigail nodded, her hand resting protectively on Gabriel's chest, feeling the steady rise and fall that meant life continued. "He never really lost it," she observed. "He just forgot for a while." Hannah's wise eyes crinkled with approval. "Precisely so, child. Precisely so." Spring advanced rapidly after that night, as though Gabriel's recovery had somehow accelerated the season itself. The land around the ranch burst into vibrant life, meadows carpeted with wildflowers, trees heavy with fresh leaves, the creek running full and musical with snowmelt from the mountains. Abigail helped Hannah plant a vegetable garden, learning the rhythms of planting and tending that she had never known in her sheltered Boston upbringing. Griffin began teaching her to ride, starting with his gentlest mare. His instructions were sparse but effective, and Abigail found herself looking forward to these lessons not just for the newfound freedom of horseback, but for the quiet companionship they offered. Since the night of Gabriel's illness, something fundamental had shifted in Griffin. Though still a man of few words, his presence had transformed. Where once his silence had felt like a barrier keeping others at bay, now it enveloped them like a comfortable blanket under which understanding flourished without the need for constant expression. Sometimes at dinner, he would recount stories from his days as an army surgeon, brief anecdotes that nevertheless revealed much about the man he had been and might be again. Hannah watched these developments with quiet satisfaction. "I haven't seen him like this since before the war," she confided to Abigail one afternoon as they hung laundry in the warm spring breeze. Gabriel flourished with the season, growing stronger each day, his curious eyes tracking everything around him. He had a particular fascination with Griffin, often reaching for him with determined little hands when the taciturn rancher was nearby. To Abigail's surprise, Griffin occasionally acquiesced, allowing Gabriel to grasp his finger or examine the buttons on his shirt with solemn concentration. One afternoon in mid-May, as Abigail was teaching Gabriel to recognize different wildflowers in the garden, she spotted a cloud of dust on the road leading to the ranch. Three riders were approaching, the lead one dressed in a polished black suit that stood out sharply against the casual attire typical of the region. Abigail's heart hammered as she recognized the familiar silhouette, Wyatt Davis. She clutched Gabriel to her chest and hurried toward the house, calling for Hannah. "Someone's coming," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I think it's Wyatt Davis." Hannah quickly closed the windows and the back door. "Griffin's prepared for this. Come with me." Hannah led Abigail and Gabriel to a small cellar beneath the kitchen floor, a hiding place Griffin had prepared in advance. They sat in darkness, listening to the sound of hoofbeats and voices above. "I'm looking for a young woman and her infant son," Wyatt's voice filtered down to them. "I have information they're staying here." "No women here," Griffin replied, his voice cold and firm. "Just me and my housekeeper." "Then you wouldn't mind if we look around?" "I'm afraid I would. This is private property." A tense silence followed, then Wyatt spoke again. "We'll meet again, Hayes. I have time and money. Sooner or later, I'll find what belongs to me." As the hoofbeats receded, Abigail released a shaky breath. Gabriel, as if sensing his mother's fear, remained quiet against her chest. After ensuring it was safe, Griffin opened the cellar door. "They're gone," he said, his voice still taut with tension. "But he'll be back." Abigail climbed out, still holding Gabriel close. "You prepared this hiding place long ago?" Griffin nodded. "I prepare for all contingencies." He paused, then added softly, "I won't let them take my family." It was the first time Griffin had called them his family, and despite the frightening circumstances, Abigail's heart warmed at the declaration. One evening in late April, Abigail sat at the small table near the window, where moonlight mingled with the golden flicker of the oil lamp. Griffin and Hannah had retired for the night, and Gabriel slept soundly in his cradle. The house was wrapped in peaceful silence, broken only by the occasional pop of embers in the dying fire. Abigail withdrew a piece of parchment from the drawer and stared at its blank surface for a long moment before picking up the pen Hannah had given her from her own meager possessions. "Dear Dr. Hayes," she began, then crossed it out. "Dear Griffin," she wrote instead. The words came slowly at first, then in a rush, filling the page with thoughts she had held inside for months. "I don't know how to thank you for saving not just our lives, but my soul as well. When you found us in that storm, I had nothing left. No name, no hope, no future. Just a desperate mother clutching her child against the cold. I see you healing, not just for Gabriel, but for yourself. And in that process, you have healed me too. I never thought I would find peace after everything that happened. I never thought I would feel safe again. But with you, I have both. I see the way you care for us, not with grand gestures or flowery words, but with steady presence and quiet kindness. The tea waiting each morning, the paths cleared after rain, the rocking chair restored with such care. I see you, Griffin Hayes. I see the man beneath the silence, the healer behind the scars. And I want you to know that whatever happens, wherever life takes us after spring, I will forever be grateful for these months of sanctuary you have given us. Abigail paused, her pen hovering over the page. There was more she could write, deeper feelings taking root in her heart that frightened and exhilarated her in equal measure. But she held back, uncertain whether such sentiments would be welcomed or would only add to the burdens Griffin already carried. Instead, she signed simply, "With deepest gratitude, Abigail." She read over the letter twice, then carefully folded it and slipped it beneath her mattress. "He has enough ghosts," she whispered to the sleeping Gabriel. "I won't add the weight of my feelings to his shoulders." The next day brought warm sunshine and the first hummingbirds of the season, darting like living jewels among the flowering shrubs near the house. Abigail spent the morning helping Hannah with spring cleaning, airing out winter linens, and washing windows until they sparkled in the sunlight. After lunch, she went to retrieve her shawl from her room before joining Griffin for her writing lesson. When she reached beneath the mattress for the letter, wanting to read it once more, perhaps to burn it, her fingers met only the smooth sheet. The letter was gone. Her heart lurched painfully. Had Griffin found it? Or Hannah, perhaps, while changing the bedding? She searched frantically but found nothing. Uneasiness settled in her stomach like a stone. Throughout her writing lesson, she watched Griffin for any sign that he had read her words. But he was as taciturn as ever, correcting her posture with brief touches and sparse instructions, his expression giving away nothing. That night at dinner, Hannah chatted about the garden while Griffin ate in his usual silence. Neither gave any indication that anything had changed. Gradually, Abigail's anxiety eased. Perhaps the letter had simply fallen behind the bed, or maybe she had imagined writing it all together in her exhaustion. As she settled Gabriel for the night, singing softly to him in the restored rocking chair, Abigail decided to let the matter rest. Some things, perhaps, were better left unsaid. The tranquility of their existence was shattered the following morning by the arrival of an unexpected visitor. Abigail was in the garden with Gabriel when she heard the sound of an approaching horse. Looking up, she saw a distinguished-looking older man with silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard reining his mount to a stop before the house. There was something hauntingly familiar about the set of his shoulders, the stern line of his mouth. As he dismounted and removed his hat, revelation struck her like a physical blow. "Father," she whispered, instinctively pulling Gabriel closer. Dr. Harold Fairchild stood before her, looking somewhat diminished from the towering figure of authority she remembered, but unmistakably her father. His eyes, so like her own, moved from her face to Gabriel, softening visibly at the sight of his grandson. "I've found you, Evelyn," he said, his voice grave but lacking the thunderous condemnation she had feared. "I've come to bring you and the child home." Before Abigail could respond, Griffin appeared at her side, positioning himself subtly but unmistakably between her and her father. "Her name is Abigail Winters," he said, his quiet voice carrying an edge of steel. "And this is her home now, if she chooses it." Dr. Fairchild's eyebrows rose at Griffin's protective stance. "And who might you be, sir?" "Griffin Hayes, this is my ranch." The two men assessed each other with the wariness of territorial wolves, neither yielding ground. Abigail felt frozen in place. Gabriel clutched to her chest like a shield. Hannah emerged from the house, quickly taking in the situation. "Why don't we all come inside?" she suggested, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Some discussions aren't meant for the open air." Once seated in Griffin's living room, an uncomfortable silence fell. Griffin remained standing, positioned near Abigail's chair, his presence reassuring despite the tension radiating from him. "How did you find me?" Abigail finally asked. Dr. Fairchild sighed heavily, suddenly looking every one of his 60-odd years. "I've had people searching for you since you left, Evelyn. When I learned you had taken the train west with Crawford," he shook his head. "I was wrong, Evelyn. Your mother left me after what I did. I've come to apologize." Abigail stared at him, disbelief warring with a lifetime of conditioned respect. "You threw me out of our home," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "You took away my name, said I was no longer your daughter. And that was the greatest sin of my life," the old man admitted, tears welling in his eyes. "I let pride and fear of what others would think override my love for my child. I failed you as a father and as a Christian." He reached inside his coat and withdrew a letter, the paper creased from frequent handling. "Your mother wrote this before she left. She said my treatment of you had broken her heart beyond repair." His voice cracked. "I lost everything. my wife, my daughter, my standing in the congregation. And I realized it was entirely my own doing. Griffin had remained silent throughout this exchange, but Abigail felt his steady presence like an anchor in stormy seas. When her father mentioned Elliot Crawford, Griffin's jaw tightened visibly. I found Crawford, Doctor, Fairchild continued. He admitted to deceiving multiple young women. He's a confidence man, a swindler. He looked at Gabriel with genuine tenderness. But this child is innocent of his father's sins. He's my grandson, my blood. Abigail felt a surge of protective fury. Gabriel is my son, she said firmly. Whatever your feelings about me or his father, he is mine to raise as I see fit. Dr. Fairchild raised his hands in a placating gesture. I'm not here to take him from you, Evelyn. Abigail, he corrected himself. I'm here to offer you both a home, protection, the Fairchild name. And if I decline, Abigail asked. Her father looked genuinely surprised. I assumed you would want to return. Your life here must be... He glanced around the simple but comfortable room. Difficult compared to what you knew. Griffin shifted slightly, drawing Dr. Fairchild's attention. Mrs. Winters has made a place for herself here, he said quietly. She's respected. Hannah nodded agreement. The girl's got a natural way with the garden, and she's learning to ride. Gabriel thrives in the mountain air. They both do. Dr. Fairchild looked from one face to another, gradually understanding dawning. You've found a family here? He said softly to Abigail. Abigail nodded, her hand finding Griffin's beside her chair. To her surprise, his fingers closed around hers, warm and solid. I can't go back to my old life, she told her father. I found something here. Peace, purpose. I found home. She hesitated, then added, but I will forgive you, because Mother would want that. You can stay for a while, get to know your grandson. But this is my home now. The relief in her father's eyes was palpable. That's more than I deserve, he said. Thank you. As Hannah showed Dr. Fairchild to the spare room that would be his during his stay, Griffin remained beside Abigail, their hands still joined. You didn't have to do that, she said softly. Stand up to him for me. Griffin looked down at their intertwined fingers, seeming almost surprised to find them connected. Yes, he said simply. I did. He released her hand gently and moved toward the door, pausing on the threshold. Your father seems sincere, he observed. Abigail nodded. I believe he is. People can change, can't they? Griffin's eyes held hers for a long moment. Yes, he said finally. I believe they can. With that, he disappeared into the afternoon sunlight, leaving Abigail to wonder which of them he had been referring to, her father or himself. Dr. Fairchild's presence at the ranch created an initially awkward dynamic that gradually eased as days passed. To Abigail's surprise, her father made genuine efforts to adapt to ranch life, even offering to help Hannah with her medicinal herb garden, drawing on his knowledge as a physician. More surprisingly, Griffin and Dr. Fairchild developed an unexpected rapport based on their shared medical background. Though they had stood on opposite sides during the war, Fairchild as a Union doctor, Griffin with the Confederacy, they found common ground in their experiences treating the wounded on blood-soaked battlefields. Medicine knows no uniform, Dr. Fairchild remarked one evening as they discussed battlefield techniques. A wounded man is just a man in need, whether he wears blue or gray. Griffin nodded, a rare moment of complete agreement between them. Watching them, Abigail felt a healing she hadn't known she needed. The two men who had shaped her life most profoundly, finding respect for one another despite their differences. Gabriel became the center of this new family constellation, adored by all. Dr. Fairchild proved to be a doting grandfather, spending hours simply holding the baby and talking to him in the gentle voice Abigail remembered from her earliest childhood, before religious rigidity had hardened him. One evening after dinner, as they all sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western mountains with gold and crimson, Dr. Fairchild cleared his throat. There's something you should know, Abigail, he said, his expression grave. Wyatt Davis is still searching for you and the child. Abigail tensed, her hand automatically reaching for Gabriel, who was nestled in Hannah's arms. How do you know? I encountered him in a town near here. He has papers claiming guardianship of Gabriel as the nearest Crawford relation. He hesitated, then added, and he knows where you are. Someone from Ashwood told him. Griffin was on his feet in an instant, his face hard with resolve. Abigail, you and Gabriel need to leave immediately. I have a hunting cabin 10 miles north. Hannah will take you there. What about you? Abigail asked, fear tightening her chest. I'll stay here with Dr. Fairchild. Davis will come, and it's better he finds us than you. Abigail stood, drawing herself up to her full height. No, she said firmly. I've run enough. I won't leave you to face danger because of us. Abigail, Griffin began, but she cut him off. I learned this from you, Griffin. Sometimes we have to face our fears. This is my home, and I'll fight for it. Their eyes locked in silent battle of wills. Finally, Griffin gave a curt nod. Then we prepare, he said, all of us. As they moved inside to make plans, Otto Fairchild pulled Griffin aside. Also, Hayes, he said quietly, there's something familiar about you. Have we met before? Griffin studied the older man's face. Gettysburg, he said after a moment. Field Hospital near Seminary Ridge. You helped me amputate a lieutenant's leg. We worked together for hours. Recognition dawned in Dr. Fairchild's eyes. I remember now. We saved 16 men that day. 17, Griffin corrected. The farm boy with the chest wound lived too. A slow smile spread across Dr. Fairchild's face. So he did. He extended his hand. It seems we're allies once more, Dr. Hayes. Griffin clasped the offered hand. Indeed, and this time we're both on Abigail's side. Later that night, as preparations were made to defend the ranch, weapons cleaned, doors reinforced, watchmen scheduled, Abigail found herself alone with Griffin for the first time since her father's arrival. I didn't know you fought at Gettysburg, she said softly. Griffin nodded, continuing to check the mechanism of an old revolver. Your father is a good doctor, saved many lives that day, regardless of which uniform they wore. He said the same about you. Griffin set the revolver aside, finally meeting her eyes. Abigail, if Davis comes with legal papers, they're based on lies, she said firmly. Gabriel is my son, not a piece of property to be claimed. Still, the law may not see it that way. Without a husband. He trailed off, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. Abigail's heart skipped a beat at the implication, but Griffin didn't pursue the thought. Instead, he said, whatever happens, I won't let him take Gabriel from you. I promise. The simple vow, spoken in his quiet, resolute voice, calmed her fears more than any elaborate reassurance could have. Griffin Hayes was a man of few words, but those he spoke carried the weight of absolute commitment. I know, she replied. I trust you. Something flickered in his eyes at her words, a warmth, a surprise, perhaps even a touch of wonder. Then he nodded and returned to his preparations, leaving Abigail to wonder at the power those three simple words, I trust you, seemed to hold over this complex, silent man. The storm arrived 2 days later, as if nature herself had timed it to coincide with the human drama unfolding at the ranch. Dark clouds rolled across the valley, blotting out the spring sunshine, and thunder rumbled in the distance like cavalry drums. Griffin, Abigail, Dr. Fairchild, and Hannah moved with purposeful efficiency, securing livestock, reinforcing doors and windows, preparing for both the coming tempest and the confrontation they knew awaited them. Rain will wash away tracks, Griffin observed, gazing out at the darkening sky. If we need to run. Abigail stood beside him at the window, Gabriel sleeping peacefully in her arms, blissfully unaware of the tensions surrounding him. We won't run, she said quietly. Not anymore. Griffin glanced at her, something like pride flashing briefly in his eyes before he returned his attention to the approaching storm. Stay away from the windows when they come. By mid-afternoon, the rain was falling in sheets, driven sideways by gusting winds that bent the young trees near the house. Lightning split the sky with jagged brilliance, followed by crashes of thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. It was Hannah who spotted them first, three riders emerging from the curtain of rain, approaching the house with deliberate slowness. They're here, she called, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. Dr. Fairchild moved to stand beside his daughter, while Griffin took his position by the door, a shotgun held loosely but competently in his hands. Stay back, he instructed the others. Let me handle this. Through the rain-streaked window, Abigail watched as the lead rider dismounted. A well-dressed man with cold eyes that she recognized immediately. Wyatt Davis had found them. "I know she's here, Hayes," Davis called through the downpour. "Hand her and the child over, and we'll be on our way peacefully." Griffin stepped onto the porch alone, unarmed, the shotgun left propped against the doorframe in a deliberate show of civilized intent. "Davis," he acknowledged, "we need to talk like reasonable men." "There's nothing to discuss," Davis snapped, rainwater dripping from the brim of his expensive hat. "The court has granted me guardianship of the child. It's Crawford blood, part of my family." "Based on lies," Griffin replied evenly. "She can prove it." Davis's hand moved to rest near his holstered pistol. "Step aside, Hayes. I don't want to hurt anyone, but I'll take what's mine." To Abigail's horror, Davis drew his weapon, aiming it squarely at Griffin's chest. Before she could cry out a warning, she felt her father's restraining hand on her arm. "Wait," Fairchild whispered. "Hayes knows what he's doing." Indeed, Griffin hadn't moved an inch. His stance relaxed despite the gun pointed at him. "Think carefully, Davis," he said calmly. "This isn't a path you want to take." Inside, Abigail could bear it no longer. Handing Gabriel to Hannah, she stepped out onto the porch beside Griffin, ignoring his sharp look of disapproval. "My son is not property," she called to Davis, her voice carrying clearly despite the rain. "He's a child, my child." "And my grandson," added Dr. Fairchild, emerging behind her. "I am Dr. Harold Fairchild from Ohio, and I can testify that your brother Elliot deceived my daughter." Davis's expression faltered momentarily at the unexpected appearance of Dr. Fairchild, but he recovered quickly. "A touching family reunion," he sneered, "but it changes nothing. I have the papers, signed by Judge Hollister in Cheyenne." "Papers obtained through fraud," Dr. Fairchild countered. "I've spoken with your brother Davis. He admitted everything to your sister-in-law, Margaret." For the first time, genuine alarm crossed Davis's face. "Margaret spoke to you?" Abigail seized on his reaction. "All Crawfords lie," she said boldly, "but at least Elliot had the conscience to confess his sins to his brother's wife." Davis's composure cracked further. His eyes darted between the three people standing against him, calculating his dwindling options. When he spoke again, desperation had replaced confidence. "Enough!" he shouted. "Give me the child, or I'll burn this ranch to the ground." One of his companions raised a torch, ready to throw it toward the barn where the horses were stabled. Griffin's expression remained eerily calm. "I wouldn't advise that, Crawford," he said quietly. "Why not?" Davis challenged. "Because I saved Judge Sullivan's life in Ashwood last month when he had a heart attack, and Sheriff Parker has 3 horses from my ranch. They're both behind you right now." Davis whirled to find Judge Sullivan, Sheriff Parker, and a group of Ashwood citizens, including Ezra Franklin and Martha Simmons, all mounted and armed, having approached silently through the storm. "I've heard enough, Davis," the judge said grimly. "Consider that guardianship ruling rescinded, effective immediately. And you're under arrest for attempted extortion, threatening with a deadly weapon, and fraudulent misrepresentation to the court," the sheriff added, drawing his own pistol. Davis's shoulders sagged in defeat as the sheriff dismounted to handcuff him. His companions quickly surrendered their weapons, apparently having lost all appetite for confrontation. As the group from Ashwood took Davis and his men into custody, Martha Simmons approached Abigail with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry for the gossip, Mrs. Winters. I was wrong about you and Dr. Hayes." Ezra explained, "When we heard Davis was looking for you and the child with ill intent, the whole town decided to protect our own." "Your own," Abigail echoed, surprised. "Anyone Griffin Hayes protects is Ashwood's own," Ezra said simply. "He's done too much for this town to ever go uncredited." As the impromptu posse prepared to depart with their prisoners, Judge Sullivan turned to Griffin. "We'll need statements from all of you, but it can wait until the storm passes. Davis won't trouble you again. You have my word." Griffin nodded his thanks, one professional to another. "We appreciate the intervention, Your Honor." "Least I could do for the man who kept my ticker beating," the judge replied with a wry smile. "Good evening to you all." They watched as the group disappeared into the curtain of rain, the tension of the confrontation dissipating like morning mist. As if responding to the resolution, the storm itself began to abate, the rain softening to a gentle patter, the wind dying to a whisper. Dr. Fairchild placed a hand on Abigail's shoulder. "It's over, daughter," he said softly. "Truly over now." Abigail nodded, relief washing through her in a cleansing wave. She turned to Griffin, who stood silently watching the departing riders. "Thank you," she said simply. Griffin met her eyes, something unspoken passing between them. "You stood your ground," he observed. "No more running." "No more running," she agreed. Hannah appeared in the doorway with Gabriel, who had somehow slept through the entire confrontation. "This little one has the right idea," she said with a tired smile. "I suggest we all follow his example." As they filed back into the house, the clouds parted momentarily, allowing a shaft of late evening sunlight to break through, golden, warm, and full of promise. Abigail paused on the threshold, watching as it illuminated the rain-washed landscape, transforming ordinary puddles into pools of liquid gold. It seemed, she thought, like an omen, light after darkness, peace after storm, a new beginning. Griffin remained on the porch, his tall figure silhouetted against the dramatic sky. After a moment's hesitation, Abigail handed Gabriel to Hannah and joined him. "Will they really leave us alone now?" she asked quietly. Griffin nodded. "Judge Sullivan is a man of his word, and Davis knows better than to cross him." He glanced at her. "You're safe now, you and Gabriel both." Abigail absorbed this, feeling the truth of it settle into her bones. "Safe," she repeated, testing the word, the concept still novel after months of fear. "It feels strange to say it." "You'll get used to it," Griffin said, the corner of his mouth lifting in what might almost have been a smile. They stood together in comfortable silence as the last light faded from the sky, the storm clouds dispersing to reveal the first stars of evening. Neither felt the need to speak, content in the shared moment of hard-won peace. Inside, Dr. Fairchild watched them from the window, understanding dawning in his eyes. "They love each other," he said softly to Hannah, who was settling Gabriel in his cradle. Hannah nodded, unsurprised. "They do, though I doubt either has admitted it, even to themselves." "My daughter has found her place," Dr. Fairchild mused. "Not where I expected, but perhaps exactly where she belongs." Hannah's wise eyes crinkled with approval. "The heart knows its home when it finds it, Doctor, no matter how unlikely the place might seem." Outside, unaware of this conversation, Griffin and Abigail continued their silent communion beneath the emerging stars. The air between them hummed with unspoken feelings, possibilities yet to be acknowledged, but growing stronger with each passing day. Like the spring itself, something new was blossoming at the Hayes Ranch, fragile yet resilient, unexpected yet inevitable. And like the skilled gardener Hannah had taught her to be, Abigail found herself content to let it grow at its own pace, nurturing it with patience, faith, and hope. Griffin turned to her, his expression softened by the gentle darkness. "We should go in," he said, but made no move to do so. "In a moment," Abigail replied, reluctant to break the spell of this peaceful interlude. And so they remained, side by side in the gathering night, two souls who had found in each other what neither had been searching for, a chance to begin again. The moon rose over Ashwood Valley, casting silver light across the landscape freshly washed by the storm. A peculiar stillness settled over Griffin Hayes' ranch, not the silence of fear or loneliness, but the peaceful quiet of a sanctuary secure at last. Inside the ranch house, Gabriel slept soundly in his cradle. Dr. Fairchild had retired to the guest room, and Hannah to her quarters off the kitchen. The house creaked and settled around its sleeping occupants, as though sighing in relief at dangers averted. Only Abigail and Griffin remained awake, seated side by side on the porch swing that Griffin had recently repaired. Neither had spoken since coming inside from their vigil beneath the stars. Words seemed inadequate after the day's events, and both found comfort in the eloquence of silence. The steady rhythm of the swing, the chorus of night creatures awakening after the storm, the distant howl of a coyote, these formed a lullaby more soothing than any spoken reassurance. Abigail felt the tension of the past months gradually unraveling, like a tightly wound thread finally released. Griffin sat beside her, solid and steady, as the mountains silhouetted against the night sky. His presence had become her touchstone, the fixed point around which her new life had taken shape. She stole a glance at his profile, the strong jaw, the scar that traced its way down his cheek, the gray eyes that saw so much and revealed so little. Except tonight something was different. The habitual guardedness had softened, as though the confrontation with Davis had washed away more than just an external threat. "I thought I was fated to be alone," Griffin said finally, his voice low and contemplative, barely disturbing the night's stillness. "That it was my penance for not saving them." Abigail remained silent, sensing he needed to speak without interruption. "But then you appeared in that snowstorm with Gabriel, and I realized that sometimes life gives us second chances not to fix the past, but to build something new." The words hung between them, perfect in their simplicity, profound in their meaning. Abigail felt their weight settle into her heart, filling spaces she hadn't realized were empty. "I wrote you a letter," she confessed softly. "I know," Griffin replied, surprising her. "Hannah found it when she was changing the linens." Abigail's breath caught. "You read it?" Griffin turned to face her, moonlight silvering his features, revealing an openness she had never seen before. "Every day. It's why I had the courage to stand today. Not because I'm brave, but because I finally had something worth fighting for." His hand moved across the space between them, finding hers, enveloping it in warmth. The contact was simple, undemanding, yet Abigail felt it like a current passing through her entire being. They sat that way for a long while, hands joined, gazing at the star-strewn sky, two wounded souls finding healing in each other. Time seemed suspended in that perfect moment, not a passionate declaration, but a quiet acknowledgement that their hearts had found their way home. Eventually, Griffin stood, gently pulling Abigail to her feet. "It's late," he said, though his eyes conveyed much more than his sparse words. At her bedroom door, he released her hand with noticeable reluctance. "Good night, Abigail," he said, her name on his lips, sounding like both a blessing and a promise. "Good night, Griffin," she replied, the syllables of his name carrying all the emotions she wasn't yet ready to voice. As she closed her door, Abigail pressed her back against it, heart pounding with a curious mixture of peace and exhilaration. Outside her window, the moon sailed serenely across the sky, witness to the silent promises exchanged between two hearts no longer alone. Morning arrived with the song of meadowlarks and the gentle bustle of Hannah preparing breakfast. Abigail woke feeling lighter than she had in months, perhaps years. The weight of constant fear had lifted, leaving room for something new to take root and flourish. Gabriel greeted the day with unusual cheerfulness, cooing and reaching for the sunlight streaming through the window. Abigail dressed him in his cleanest clothes, smiling at his wide-eyed curiosity about everything around him. "Today feels different, doesn't it?" she whispered to her son, "like the first real day of our new life." In the kitchen, she found Hannah kneading dough while Dr. Fairchild sat at the table, reading through one of Griffin's medical journals. The domestic scene struck Abigail with its normalcy, its rightness. This was what family looked like, different pieces coming together to form a whole. "Where's Griffin?" she asked, settling Gabriel in the high chair Griffin had crafted for him. "Checking the south pasture fence," Hannah replied, her knowing eyes taking in Abigail's brightened countenance. "Storm might have damaged it." Dr. Fairchild set aside his reading. "Abigail, I've been thinking," he began, his manner uncharacteristically hesitant. "I'll be returning to Ohio next week." Abigail felt a pang of sadness, surprising after their complicated history. In the short time since his arrival, they had begun rebuilding bridges she had thought permanently burned. "So soon?" He nodded, folding his hands on the table. "I can no longer be a minister," he admitted. "Not after everything, but I can be a better father and grandfather." He smiled at Gabriel. "I've been offered a position at the hospital in Columbus, a chance to start fresh, practice medicine again." "You'll always be welcome to visit," Abigail assured him. "Gabriel should know his grandfather. And I want you to know that I've restored your Fairchild name if you should ever want it back," he added. "I've filed the papers." Abigail considered this, touched by the gesture yet uncertain. The name Winters had become hers in a way Fairchild never truly had. It represented her choice, her independence, the woman she had become rather than the obedient daughter she had been expected to remain. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "That means more than I can say, but I think I'll remain Abigail Winters, at least for now." Her father nodded, understanding in his eyes. "You've made a good life here," he observed, "better than anything I could have provided." The conversation was interrupted by Griffin's return. He entered quietly, as was his way, but something in his demeanor had changed. He moved with the same deliberate economy of motion, but the rigid tension that had always characterized his bearing had eased. He nodded a greeting to Dr. Fairchild, his eyes seeking and finding Abigail's across the room. "Morning," he said simply, but Abigail heard the warmth beneath the single word. "Griffin, I was just telling Abigail that I'll be returning to Ohio next week," Dr. Fairchild explained. Griffin nodded, accepting the news without comment, though Abigail thought she detected relief in his expression. As much as the two men had found common ground, Griffin was a man who valued his privacy and the established rhythms of his household. "The fence held," he reported to Hannah, who had asked no question but received the answer with a nod of approval. Breakfast passed in companionable conversation, mostly between Hannah and Dr. Fairchild, with occasional contributions from Abigail. Griffin ate in his usual silence, yet somehow it no longer felt like a barrier between him and the others. Instead, his quiet presence complemented the gentle flow of words around him, like a steady bass note beneath a melody. After the meal, Griffin disappeared into the barn, while Dr. Fairchild settled on the porch with Gabriel, entertaining the baby with stories told in the soothing cadence that had once filled a church in Ohio. Hannah enlisted Abigail's help with preserving early strawberries from the garden, a task that filled the kitchen with sweet fragrance and left Abigail's fingers stained crimson. It was mid-afternoon when Griffin sought her out, finding her alone in the garden, gathering herbs for Hannah's medicinal stores. "Would you come with me?" he asked, his manner suggesting something important awaited. Curious, Abigail followed him to the barn, where he led her to a stall containing his favorite mare, a chestnut beauty named Sadie. Saddled and ready, the horse nickered softly at their approach. "I thought we might ride together," Griffin explained. "There's something I'd like to show you." Surprised and pleased, Abigail accepted his hand up into the saddle, then watched as Griffin mounted behind her, his arms creating a secure circle around her as he took the reins. The closeness sent a flutter through her chest, a sensation both exhilarating and comforting. They rode in companionable silence through meadows where wildflowers nodded in the gentle breeze. Griffin guided Sadie along an ascending trail that wound through stands of aspen and pine, eventually emerging onto a ridge that offered a breathtaking view of the valley below. From this vantage point, Abigail could see Griffin's ranch nestled against the backdrop of distant mountains, smoke curling lazily from the chimney, fields and pastures spreading outward like a patchwork quilt. It looked peaceful, permanent, a place where generations could put down roots and thrive. "It's beautiful," she breathed, taking in the panorama. Griffin nodded, his chin just brushing the top of her head. "My grandfather claimed this land after the war with Mexico, built the first cabin with his own hands." His voice carried a note of pride rarely heard. "He used to say that land is the only thing worth fighting for, because it's the only thing that lasts." He fell silent for a moment, then added more softly, "I didn't understand what he meant until now." Abigail leaned back slightly, feeling the solid warmth of him behind her. "And now?" "Now I know it's not just the land itself," Griffin replied. "It's what it represents. Home, family, future." The words, coming from this man of such careful speech, held profound significance. Abigail felt their weight, their promise. Griffin guided Sadie forward again, following the ridgeline until they reached a small clearing where a massive cedar tree stood sentinel, its branches spreading wide like welcoming arms. Beneath it, weathered but well-tended, stood a simple grave marker with the name Emma Hayes carved into the stone. "Your wife," Abigail said softly as Griffin helped her dismount. He nodded, his expression solemn, but no longer haunted as it once might have been at the mention of Emma. "And James," he added, indicating a smaller marker beside the first. "Our son. He was 3. Abigail felt a familiar ache of empathy. "I'm sorry." Griffin moved to stand before the graves, his posture respectful but not stricken. "For years, this was the only place I felt I belonged," he said quietly. "With them, even if only in memory." Abigail remained a step behind, giving him space with his memories, but Griffin turned and extended his hand to her. Surprised, she placed her fingers in his and allowed him to draw her forward to stand beside him. "I used to come here to remember what I'd lost," he continued. "Oh, now I come to remember what they taught me about love." He looked down at their joined hands. "That it's possible to love again, even after you think your heart has died." Abigail's breath caught at the naked emotion in his voice. Griffin Hayes, the man of stone and silence, was offering her his most vulnerable truth. Before she could respond, he turned and led her a few paces away, to where the ground had been freshly turned. But it wasn't a grave, it was a new marker, smooth white stone untouched by weather, with words carved in flowing script, Abigail who chose her own name, and to whom I give my heart. Time seemed to stop as Abigail read the words, then read them again, hardly daring to believe what they implied. A breeze stirred the branches overhead, dappling the ground with shifting patterns of sunlight and shadow. Her knees felt suddenly weak, and she clutched Griffin's hand tighter to steady herself. Griffin watched her face intently, his own expression open and vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. He didn't kneel. He didn't offer a ring. He had given her something far more enduring, a declaration carved in stone, placed beside his most sacred memories, a promise that would outlast words. Abigail looked up at him, her eyes brimming with tears. "Griffin," she whispered, his name a question and an answer all at once. Before he could speak, a soft sound from behind them broke the moment. They turned to find Hannah approaching, Gabriel in her arms. The old woman had followed at a discreet distance, bringing Gabriel so he could be part of this momentous occasion. "Thought the little one should be here," Hannah explained, her wise eyes twinkling with approval. Griffin nodded, gratitude evident in his expression. He took Gabriel from Hannah, holding the baby not stiffly or cautiously, but with the growing confidence of a man learning to be a father again. Gabriel, sensing the solemnity of the moment, was unusually quiet, his wide eyes taking in the sunlight filtering through the cedar branches, the stone markers, the faces of the adults around him. Then, with the perfect timing of the very young, he reached one chubby hand toward Griffin's face and uttered a clear, deliberate syllable. "Ah!" The simple sound hung in the air like a benediction. Griffin stood frozen, his eyes suddenly bright with moisture. Abigail's hand flew to her mouth, ye and wonder washing through her in equal measure. In that perfect moment, three souls stood together beneath the ancient cedar, not alone, not broken, but home at last. Hannah, witnessing from a respectful distance, wiped a tear from her weathered cheek, her heart full for the family being born before her eyes. Griffin looked from Gabriel to Abigail, his expression one of quiet wonder. No words were needed. The baby had spoken for all of them, recognizing what was already true in their hearts. They were a family, bound not by blood, but by choice, by love, by the silent promises made and kept through months of healing together. Later, as they rode back to the ranch, Gabriel secure in his mother's arms, Griffin's encircling them both, Abigail felt a completeness she had never known before. The shadows of the past, her father's rejection, Elliot's betrayal, the months of fear and uncertainty, seemed to recede with each step Sadie took toward home. Their future stretched before them like the valley below, vast with possibility, rich with promise. Not without challenges, perhaps, but faced together, those challenges would only strengthen the bonds between them. As the ranch house came into view, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon, Abigail leaned back against Griffin's chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart. "Yes," she said softly, answering the question he had carved in stone. Griffin's arms tightened around her, and she felt rather than heard his reply, a sigh of contentment, of coming home at last. Spring flowed into summer with the inexorable rhythm of seasons in the high country. The ranch flourished under the combined care of its inhabitants, Griffin's steady hand, Hannah's wisdom, Abigail's growing confidence, and Gabriel's joyful presence at the heart of it all. Dr. Fairchild departed for Ohio as planned, but not before witnessing a simple ceremony in Judge Sullivan's parlor in Ashwood. There, with Hannah, Ezra Franklin, and a few other friends from town as witnesses, Griffin Hayes and Abigail Winters exchanged vows, becoming in law what they had already become in heart, a family. The judge had smiled benevolently as he pronounced them husband and wife. "Never thought I'd see the day Griffin Hayes took himself a bride," he remarked afterward. "But then I never thought I'd survive that heart attack either. Seems you're a man of miracles, Hayes." Griffin, uncharacteristically dapper in a new shirt and polished boots, had merely nodded, his eyes never leaving Abigail's face. She wore a simple dress of pale blue, adorned only with wildflowers Hannah had woven into her hair that morning. In her arms, Gabriel sported a miniature version of Griffin's neat black tie, fashioned by Hannah's clever fingers. "You'll come visit?" Abigail had asked her father as he prepared to depart the following day. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away, Doctor." "How I stay, Fairchild assured her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I want to watch my grandson grow up." Griffin, standing beside Abigail, had extended his hand to the older man. "You'll always have a place here, to Fairchild." The two men shook hands, respect having grown into genuine regard during their time together. As Dr. Fairchild's coach disappeared down the road toward Ashwood, Abigail had felt not grief but gratitude. For reconciliation, for second chances, for the healing power of love that had touched every member of her newfound family. Life settled into new rhythms after the wedding. Griffin continued his work with the horses, but he also gradually resumed some medical practice, treating neighbors and townspeople who sought him out for his skill and discretion. Word spread quietly through the valley that Dr. Hayes was practicing again, and patients began to appear at the ranch with increasing frequency. Abigail assisted him when needed, discovering an aptitude for healing that surprised and pleased them both. Under Griffin's tutelage, she learned to dress wounds, set bones, prepare tinctures and poultices from Hannah's medicinal herbs. The work fulfilled her in ways she hadn't anticipated, giving her a sense of purpose beyond motherhood. Though Gabriel remained the center of her world, Hannah watched these developments with quiet satisfaction, occasionally remarking to Gabriel as she rocked him, "Your mama and papa were both born to heal, little one. Different wounds, same calling." Summer brought new visitors to the ranch. Martha Simmons, whose initial gossip had so troubled Abigail, now called regularly, bringing small gifts and gradually becoming a friend rather than merely a nosy neighbor. Ezra Franklin made a habit of delivering supplies personally rather than sending his clerk, clearly enjoying the company and Hannah's excellent coffee. Most surprisingly, a letter arrived from Margaret Davis, Wyatt's sister-in-law, expressing remorse for her family's treatment of Abigail and requesting permission to visit her nephew. After careful consideration and discussion with Griffin, Abigail invited her to the ranch. Margaret proved to be a gentle, soft-spoken woman who bore no resemblance to either her husband or brother-in-law in temperament. "I always knew what they were," she confided to Abigail as they watched Gabriel play on a blanket spread beneath the apple tree. "But family loyalty kept me silent too long. I'm sorry for that." "You spoke when it mattered most," Abigail assured her, finding it surprisingly easy to forgive now that her own wounds had begun to heal. As July ripened toward August, Griffin surprised Abigail one evening by leading her to the barn after Gabriel was asleep. There, spread across his workbench, were plans for an addition to the ranch house. "A proper doctor's office," he explained, his finger tracing the neat drawings, "with a separate entrance for patients. And here," he indicated another section, "a schoolroom for Gabriel when he's older, and any others who might come along." Abigail studied the plans, touched by the thought behind them, the planning for a shared future. "Others?" she asked, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Griffin's ears reddened slightly, but he met her eyes steadily. "If you'd like," he said simply. Abigail's heart swelled with love for this man who expressed his deepest feelings, not in flowery declarations but in practical actions. Building rooms for children, not yet conceived, planning for years they would spend together, creating spaces where their shared work could flourish. "I'd like that very much," she replied, slipping her hand into his. Construction began the following week, with neighbors from surrounding ranches coming to help raise the framework in the tradition of the frontier. Griffin worked alongside them, his natural reticence giving way to quiet camaraderie as they labored together. Watching from the shade of the porch, Gabriel on her hip, Abigail marveled at the transformation in her husband. The hollow-eyed, grief-haunted man who had found her in the blizzard was giving way to someone new, or perhaps someone rediscovered, a man who had existed before war and loss had buried him beneath layers of protective silence. Hannah joined her, wiping her hands on her apron after setting out lunch for the workers. "He's coming back to himself," she observed, following Abigail's gaze to where Griffin was directing the placement of a beam. "Piece by piece, day by day." "Was he very different before?" Abigail asked, curious about the man Griffin had been in his youth. Hannah's eyes grew distant with memory. "Lively," she said after a moment, "full of plans and ideas, quick to laugh, especially with Sophia. She glanced at Abigail. I hear him laughing with you sometimes, when you don't know I'm listening. It's been so long since these walls heard that sound. Abigail nodded, understanding the gift she had been given in Griffin's gradual opening, like a flower turning toward the sun after a long winter. He laughs with Gabriel too, she said softly, when they think they're alone. Hannah smiled, wisdom in her aged eyes. That's how healing happens, she said. But all at once in some great revelation, but in small moments of forgetting to be broken. The addition progressed steadily through August and into September. Abigail took Gabriel to visit the construction site daily, letting him watch in fascination as walls rose and windows were framed. Griffin often joined them on these visits, explaining each step of the process to Gabriel as though the baby understood every word. He'll grow up knowing how to build things, Griffin remarked once. How to create rather than destroy. Abigail heard in these simple words an entire philosophy, a commitment to raising their son, for Gabriel had become theirs in every way that mattered, with values that would serve him well in a world that too often glorified destruction over creation. As autumn painted the valley in russet and gold, the new addition neared completion. Griffin spent increasingly long hours finishing the interior details, determined to have everything perfect before the first snow. Abigail often brought his dinner to the construction site, sitting with him in companionable silence as twilight settled over the land. One such evening, as they sat on the newly completed steps of the doctor's office entrance, Gabriel asleep in Abigail's arms, Griffin broke their comfortable silence with an unexpected question. Are you happy, Abigail? She turned to him, surprised by the directness of the query. Griffin was looking at her with an intensity that took her breath away, as though her answer held immense significance. Yes, she replied without hesitation. Deeply, completely happy. Relief washed across his features. Sometimes I worry, he admitted, his voice low, that this life is too quiet for you, too far from the society you knew. Abigail considered his concern, understanding its roots in his own insecurities rather than any indication she had given of dissatisfaction. The society I knew rejected me when I needed it most, she reminded him gently. Here I've found acceptance, purpose, love. She shifted Gabriel to her other arm. I've found family, Griffin. That's worth more than all the ballrooms and drawing rooms in Boston. He nodded, accepting her answer, though she sensed he needed more reassurance on this point. Shifting closer, she rested her head against his shoulder. What about you? She asked. Are you happy? Griffin was silent for so long that Abigail wondered if he would answer. Finally, he said, I didn't think I deserved to be after Sophia and James. Happiness felt like a betrayal of their memory. Abigail waited, giving him space to find the words at his own pace. Now I understand that the real betrayal would be wasting the life I still have, he continued. Sophia would have wanted me to find joy again, to love again. He turned to meet Abigail's gaze. So yes, I am happy, more than I ever expected to be. In the gathering dusk, with Gabriel peaceful between them in the future they were building, rising solid around them, the simple exchange felt like a milestone, an acknowledgement of how far they had come from the broken souls who had found each other in a blizzard. The following morning brought the first frost, delicate patterns of ice silvering the grass and outlining each leaf with crystalline precision. Abigail woke early, drawn to the window by the quality of light streaming through, clear and sharp, carrying the promise of winter's approach. Gabriel, nearly 8 months old now, was sitting up in his cradle, babbling happily to himself. His vocabulary had expanded beyond pa to include approximations of ma and na for Hannah, along with an assortment of enthusiastic but unintelligible sounds. Abigail lifted him, burying her face in the sweet scent of his neck. Good morning, my love, she murmured. Shall we see what the day brings? In the kitchen, she found Hannah already at work preparing breakfast. Griffin, unusually, was still at the table rather than out, seeing to the morning chores. A letter lay open before him, and something in his expression made Abigail pause in the doorway. What is it? She asked, sensing news of significance. Griffin looked up, his expression unreadable. A letter from your father, he said, holding it out to her. Read it. Shifting Gabriel to her hip, Abigail took the letter and began to read. Dr. Fairchild wrote of his new position at the hospital in Columbus, of his gradual rebuilding of a life after leaving the ministry. But the core of his message was an unexpected proposal. I have been approached by the Western Medical Society regarding the establishment of a frontier hospital in your region. They seek a physician willing to relocate and establish a proper medical facility to serve the growing communities of the territory. I immediately thought of you, Griffin, and your remarkable skills. Funds are available for construction and initial equipment. What is needed is a doctor of vision and commitment. I have taken the liberty of recommending you for the position, emphasizing your experience both in war medicine and in treating the specific conditions prevalent in frontier communities. Should you be interested, representatives of the Society will visit Ashwood in late October to discuss possibilities. I assured them that you and Abigail would provide exemplary leadership for such an endeavor. Abigail looked up from the letter, her mind racing with implications. A hospital? Here? Griffin nodded slowly. In Ashwood, most likely. The nearest proper medical facility is currently in Cheyenne, too far for many emergencies. What do you think? Abigail asked, studying his face for clues to his reaction. Griffin ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of rare uncertainty. It would mean returning to medicine fully, not just occasional patients, but full responsibility. He looked at her directly. It would mean changes for all of us. Hannah, who had been listening quietly, brought coffee to the table. Changes can be good, she observed, especially when they build on strengths already present. Abigail nodded agreement, thinking of the patients who already sought Griffin's help, of the natural way he had returned to his calling despite his initial resistance. You're already a doctor again, she said softly. This would just make it official. Griffin considered this, his expression thoughtful. It would mean dividing my time between the hospital and the ranch, he mused. Hiring more help here. I could assist you at the hospital, Abigail suggested, excitement building as she envisioned the possibilities. Hannah has already been teaching me about medicinal herbs. I could learn more, become a proper nurse. Gabriel chose that moment to bounce enthusiastically in her arms, as if endorsing the plan. A smile tugged at the corner of Griffin's mouth. Seems the youngest Hayes approves, he remarked. The simple statement, acknowledging Gabriel as a Hayes, as his son in all but blood, settled the matter more definitively than any lengthy discussion could have. It was a family decision, made for the good of all, including the child who united them. I'll write to your father, Griffin decided. Tell him we're interested in meeting with the society representatives. As he penned the response later that morning, Abigail watched from the doorway of his study, Gabriel crawling energetically at her feet. The sight of Griffin bent over his desk, writing with the same precision he brought to all tasks, filled her with a profound sense of rightness. This was the man he was meant to be. Healer, builder, father. The silent, withdrawn figure who had rescued her from the blizzard had been only a shadow of his true self, diminished by grief but never truly destroyed. Later, as they walked together to the newly completed addition for a final inspection, Abigail voiced a thought that had been forming since reading Dr. Fairchild's letter. This was always meant to be more than just our home, wasn't it? Even when you were building it? Griffin glanced at her, a flicker of surprise crossing his features. What do you mean? The layout, Abigail explained. The separate entrance for patients, the extra rooms. You were already planning for something more, even before my father's letter. A slow smile, still rare but increasingly frequent, spread across Griffin's face. Maybe I was, he acknowledged. Or maybe I just wanted to build something worthy of the family that would live in it. Family. The word still carried a thrill of wonder for Abigail, who had thought herself forever cast out from that blessing. Now she stood at the threshold of not just a home but a legacy, a place of healing and growth that would serve not only their own needs, but those of an entire community. Griffin opened the door to what would become his examination room, gesturing for her to enter. The space was flooded with afternoon light from carefully positioned windows. The walls freshly whitewashed, the floor smooth and sturdy underfoot. It's perfect, Abigail said, turning slowly to take in every detail. You've thought of everything. Griffin moved to stand beside her, his hand finding hers in a gesture that had become natural between them. Not everything, he said quietly. Just the important things. In that moment, with the autumn sun streaming through windows he had built with his own hands, Abigail understood that the true gift Griffin had given her was not shelter or security or even his name, but this inclusion in his vision, partnership in his purpose, a place in the future he was building step by careful step. "I love you," she said simply, the words rising from her heart with the clarity of absolute truth. Griffin's eyes widened slightly. It was the first time either had spoken those words directly, though they had been expressed in countless other ways over the months. He drew her gently into his arms, his response a whisper against her hair. "And I you, Abigail Hayes, more than I have words to say." Coming from this man of careful, measured speech, the declaration held profound significance. Abigail closed her eyes, committing the moment to memory, the quality of light, the smell of fresh wood and paint, the solid warmth of Griffin's embrace, and most of all, the sensation of completion, of having found at last the place and person she was meant to find. October arrived with shorter days and brilliant foliage that transformed the valley into a tapestry of red, orange, and gold. True to Dr. Fairchild's letter, representatives of the Western Medical Society arrived in Ashwood mid-month, a Dr. Lawrence Phillips and his assistant, Miss Eleanor Reed. Griffin and Abigail received them at the ranch, where Hannah had prepared a meal worthy of distinguished visitors. Gabriel, now adept at charming strangers, did his part by demonstrating his newest skill, pulling himself up to stand while holding onto furniture, then taking a few tentative steps while gripping adult fingers for support. "A fine boy," Dr. Philoes observed, clearly taken with Gabriel's antics. "He has your eyes, Mrs. Hayes." Abigail exchanged a quick glance with Griffin, who responded smoothly. Gabriel reminds us daily of life's unexpected gifts. The discussion that followed was detailed and thorough. Dr. Phillips outlined the Society's vision for a network of frontier hospitals to serve the territory's growing populations. The Ashwood facility would be modest initially, perhaps 10 beds, a surgery, dispensary, and living quarters for a resident physician and nurses. "We've reviewed your service record, Dr. Hayes," Phillips said, referring to notes in a leather portfolio. "Your experience in field surgery during the war is particularly valuable. Frontier medicine often requires similar improvisation and resourcefulness." Griffin nodded, his expression serious. "I've encountered everything from mining accidents to childbirth complications in my practice here. The need is certainly present." "And growing," Miss Reed added, speaking for the first time. A brisk, efficient woman in her 40s, she managed the Society's administrative affairs with evident competence. "The railroad will reach Ashwood within 2 years, according to current plans. Population will likely double." The conversation continued well into the evening, covering practical matters of funding, staffing, and construction timelines. Throughout, Abigail observed Griffin's growing engagement, the way he leaned forward when discussing potential treatments for common frontier ailments, the animation in his normally reserved features when describing modifications he would make to standard hospital designs for frontier conditions. This, she realized, was the Griffin Hayes that had existed before war and loss had dimmed his fire, passionate about medicine, committed to healing, alive with purpose and vision. When their visitors departed the following morning, promising a formal offer within the month, Griffin stood on the porch watching their wagon disappear down the road, his expression thoughtful. "Having second thoughts?" Abigail asked, joining him with Gabriel in her arms. Griffin shook his head slowly. "No, just realizing how far I've come from the man who swore never to practice medicine again." He looked at her, his gray eyes clear and direct. "Because of you. Because you believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself." Abigail shook her head. "The healing was always within you, Griffin. I just helped you remember it." He smiled then, one of his rare full smiles that transformed his features. "Perhaps that's what love does best," he observed. "Helps us remember who we truly are beneath the scars." The wisdom of this simple statement stayed with Abigail throughout the day, resonating with her own experience. Griffin had indeed helped her remember who she was beneath the labels of fallen woman and unwed mother that society had imposed, helped her rediscover her strength, her worth, her capacity for joy. That evening, as the first snowflakes of the season began to fall, they gathered before the fire in the main room. Griffin in his chair, Abigail in the restored rocker with Gabriel drowsing in her arms, Hannah in her accustomed place by the window, knitting needles clicking rhythmically. First snow, Hannah observed, glancing outside at the white flakes swirling in the lamplight. Full circle since you arrived, Abigail. Abigail nodded, the realization striking her with sudden force. Almost a year had passed since that desperate night at the train station, since the moment Griffin Hayes had appeared from the storm like an answer to an unspoken prayer. So much has changed, she murmured, looking down at Gabriel's peaceful face, then across at Griffin, who was watching them both with an expression of quiet contentment. And so much remains the same, Hannah replied with her customary wisdom. The land, the seasons, the way hearts find each other hidden in the darkest night. Griffin rose and moved to stand behind Abigail's chair, his hand coming to rest gently on her shoulder. Together they watched the snow falling more heavily now, blanketing the world in pristine white, not a symbol of isolation and fear as it had been a year ago, but a clean page on which to write the next chapter of their story. Gabriel stirred in Abigail's arms, his eyes opening to focus on Griffin with perfect recognition. "Pa," he said clearly, reaching up with complete confidence that his gesture would be met with love. Griffin lifted him, settling the boy against his chest with practiced ease. "Yes, son," he replied, the words simple but laden with meaning. "I'm here." And in that moment, as snow fell softly outside and warmth enveloped them within, Abigail understood the true nature of the promise that had been made between them. Not in grand declarations or formal vows, but in the quiet constancy of presence, in the steady building of a shared life, in the healing they had found together. It was a silent promise, spoken in actions rather than words, in choices made day after day to remain, to build, to love. A promise as enduring as the mountains that cradled their valley, as faithful as the seasons in their eternal cycle, as healing as the passage of time itself. As Griffin settled back in his chair, Gabriel secure in his arms, Abigail caught Hannah's eye and across the room. The old woman smiled, a lifetime of wisdom in her gaze, and nodded once, acknowledging what they both knew, that in this simple scene of domestic tranquility lay the answer to life's deepest questions, the fulfillment of humanity's most profound longings. Home, family, love, not as abstract concepts, but as lived reality, created through pain and joy, struggle and triumph, loss and redemption. Outside, the snow continued to fall, erasing the boundaries between earth and sky, between past and future. Inside, the fire crackled softly, casting its golden light over the family gathered in its warmth. Each member broken in their own way, yet made whole together, bound by silent promises, kept through winter's darkest nights, and illuminated by spring's most hopeful dawns. And so the story of Griffin and Abigail Hayes took its place among the timeless tales of the frontier, not a legend of gunfights or gold strikes, but a quieter epic of courage and healing, of second chances and new beginnings. A reminder that even in the vast wilderness of human experience, lost hearts can find their way home, guided by the silent promises we make to one another in our quest for wholeness. As night deepened around the ranch house, peace settled over its inhabitants, not the fragile peace of temporary refuge, but the enduring peace of journey's end, of sanctuary found, of love triumphant over loss. A peace built on the foundation of a promise made not with grand gestures or flowery words, but with the steady presence of each new day, each shared burden, each moment of quiet joy. A silent promise, eloquent in its simplicity, eternal in its truth. 2 years later, children's laughter echoed through the halls of Ashwood Hospital, where spring sunlight streamed through tall windows. Griffin Hayes looked up from his medical records, smiling as he heard familiar footsteps racing along the brick corridor. "Father!" called Gabriel, now a healthy 3-year-old with bright eyes and his mother's radiant smile. "The baby is awake." Griffin set the records aside and opened his arms to his son. "Is that so? And what does the young man think of his new sister?" "She's tiny," Gabriel replied, frowning seriously, "and red, but Mother says she'll grow up to be a beautiful lady like Grandma Hannah." Griffin lifted his son and walked toward the door. "Your mother is always right about such things. Let's go see our ladies, shall we?" In a sunlit room at the end of the hallway, Abigail sat on the bed, a small bundle in her arms. Hannah was arranging fresh flowers by the window, wildflowers that Gabriel had picked from the meadow near the hospital. "Someone wants to see their father," Abigail said as Griffin and Gabriel entered, her eyes bright with happiness. Griffin carefully set Gabriel down and approached the bed, kneeling to look at his daughter's tiny face. Abigail gently pulled back the blanket, revealing silky dark hair and gray eyes identical to her father's. Sophia, he whispered, naming her after his first wife, not from sorrow or regret, but out of respect for the past that had led him to this present. Sophia Hannah Hayes, Abigail added, smiling at Hannah, the woman who had become her mother in every way except blood. Hannah wiped away tears, then patted her apron pocket. Almost forgot. A letter from your father arrived this morning. He's coming to visit next month. Says he has more medical texts for the hospital library. From the open window, they could hear the cheerful sounds of Ashwood, a town thriving since the hospital opened. Hammering echoed from the new school being built, the sound of wheels on the road bringing patients and visitors from neighboring towns. Gabriel carefully climbed onto the bed, sitting beside his mother, to look at his sister. Father says we're going home tomorrow, and Ezra brought me a wooden horse. That's right, Griffin said, sitting beside his family, his arm around Abigail's shoulders. But our home is in both places now, the ranch and here, wherever we are together. Through the window he could see the outline of the mountains where he had once believed he would live and die alone, where he had placed that marble headstone on that fateful day, carving Abigail's name in the dedication of his heart. Behind him were his son's happy voice, his infant daughter's gentle breaths, and the steadfast love of the woman who had found him in the storm. The memory of the man he had been, lonely, silent, broken, now seemed to belong to another lifetime. But Griffin understood that it was that very man, with all his pain and isolation, who had brought him here to a fullness he had never dared to dream of. Love, he whispered, his lips pressed against Abigail's hair. She looked up, eyes shining. What is it? What my grandfather misunderstood, Griffin explained. It's not land that's the only thing that lasts. It's love. It lives on and after we're gone, in our children, in those we heal. And in the silent promises we keep to each other, Abigail said, meeting his gaze with the deep understanding that comes only from sharing both the brightest and darkest of days together. Outside, the town of Ashwood continued its rhythm. Inside the small sunlit room, a family, formed not by circumstance or blood, but by choice and courage, embraced their present in all their tomorrows. And in the warm sunlight of family love, the shadows of the past finally dissolved completely.